Stop settling for a pathetic 7% return on your portfolio. Those are rookie numbers. I'm going to show you how to wait until the market drops 100% so you can purchase a 4-bedroom villa using nothing but a ham sandwich and a firm handshake. This isn't a history lesson. This is an exclusive wealth-building system I call apocalypse arbitrage. Most people see hyperinflation as a disaster, but the savvy investor sees it for what it really is: a clearance sale on civilization. By analyzing the collapse of the Weimar Republic in 1923, the implosion of Hungary in 1946, and the meltdown of Zimbabwe in 2008, I'm going to teach you how to profit from the end of the world. Let's get into the fundamentals. The fundamentals of collapse. The first step in our system is identifying when a government discovers the infinite money glitch. Economists call this the quantity theory of money, but I prefer to call it the print button panic. It happens when a government tries to solve a debt problem with a printer instead of a tax hike. In 1923, Germany was in a bind. French troops had occupied the Ruhr industrial heartland to extract unpaid reparations. The German government told its workers to go on strike to spite the French, but they still had to pay those striking workers. How do you pay millions of people to do nothing when you have zero tax revenue? You hit print. It's the exact same strategy Zimbabwe used in the 2000s. When you need to pay the army to keep them loyal, but the economy has evaporated, you just add zeros to the bank balances. It creates a feedback loop. The more you print, the less it's worth, so you have to print even more just to buy the same amount of paper and ink. You need to watch for this moment, the moment the government stops pretending the money is real. Once the printer starts whirring, you enter the phase I call the lunchtime liquidation. This is about the velocity of money. In a normal economy, a dollar bill might change hands once a week. In a hyperinflationary collapse, that bill is burning a hole in your pocket the second you touch it. In Weimar Berlin, the velocity became so intense that companies started paying workers twice a day. You would get your morning salary at 11 a.m. and you wouldn't deposit it. You would run, literally sprint, to the factory gates where your wife was waiting. You'd throw bundles of cash out the window to her so she could rush to the baker before the price of bread doubled at noon. If you held cash for even 1 hour, you were effectively volunteering for a 50% pay cut. There are records of waiters in Berlin restaurants standing on tables every 30 minutes to announce the new menu prices. You could order a coffee for 5,000 marks, and by the time you finished drinking it, the bill was 8,000. This is the pay packet race, and you cannot win it by saving. This leads to the third fundamental, the calorie standard. When the velocity of money hits infinity, the currency effectively dies. The economy doesn't stop, but it resets. We stop trusting the number printed on the bill and start trusting the weight of the object. In 1946 Hungary, when they issued the 100 quintillion pengo note, nobody cared about the math. The entire economy shifted from a gold standard to a calorie standard. Tangible assets like potatoes, butter, and coal became the new reserve currency. This is a massive psychological shift. People stop looking at a billion-mark note as wealth and start seeing it as kindling for the stove. The savvy investor realizes that in this environment, a sack of flour is a more stable store of value than a government bond. Once you understand that calories are the new gold, you are ready to execute the trade. The investment strategy. Now that we have established the theoretical framework of the collapse, we move to the execution phase. This is where we separate the academics from the tycoons. The fourth pointer in our system is what I call the asset flip, or more specifically, the real estate for rye strategy. In a functioning economy, you trade currency for goods. In a hyperinflationary apocalypse, that dynamic inverts. You trade survival for luxury. During the height of the Weimar crisis, there was a massive flight to real values, which is a fancy way of saying people panicked and bought anything that couldn't be printed by a central bank. This created the greatest arbitrage opportunity in history for anyone holding food. There are documented police reports from 1923 Berlin detailing how university students from rural families became the new aristocracy. One student famously traded his family's surplus harvest, specifically a few sacks of potatoes, for a grand piano. Think about that trade. A precision-engineered musical instrument built by master craftsmen over months, exchanged for a pile of tubers that grew in the dirt. But you can't eat a piano. When the currency dies, the hierarchy of needs collapses, and the farmer becomes the king. If you happen to hold foreign currency, the leverage becomes even more obscene. This is the ham sandwich villa technique. At the peak of the madness, the exchange rate hit 4 trillion marks to the US dollar. For an American tourist in Berlin, the entire city was effectively a clearance bin. You didn't just buy dinner for the price of a modest meal in New York, you could buy the restaurant in Berlin. There were stories of Americans with a single $100 bill buying entire rows of 6-story apartment buildings in the fashionable districts. It wasn't just a discount, it was a transfer of the nation's infrastructure to anyone with a hard currency. But perhaps you don't have potatoes or dollars. That brings us to pointer number 5. The debtor's jackpot. This is the most counterintuitive part of the system because we are trained to believe debt is bad. In a collapse scenario, debt is your best friend. The winner of the Weimar inflation wasn't the government, it was the massive borrower. The hero of our masterclass is Hugo Stinnes. Stinnes was a German industrialist who understood the math of the apocalypse better than anyone. Stinnes borrowed aggressively. He took out massive loans denominated in marks to buy coal mines, steel mills, and shipping lines. His competitors thought he was over-leveraged and reckless, but Stinnes knew that the print button was stuck in the on position. As the mark collapsed, the nominal value of his debt stayed exactly the same, but the revenue from his mines adjusted for inflation daily. He paid back loans worth millions of gold marks with paper marks that were worth less than a postage stamp. If you have a fixed-rate mortgage and your wage increases by 10,000% every week, you effectively delete your debt for the price of a cup of coffee. It is the financial equivalent of short-selling the entire country's currency. However, you need to prepare for the physical reality of this strategy. Pointer number 6 is the logistics of infinity. We tend to think of money as digital numbers, but hyperinflation is a physical crisis. You eventually reach a point where you physically cannot carry enough paper to conduct a transaction. This leads to the famous wheelbarrow paradox. You have likely heard the joke, a man takes a wheelbarrow full of cash to the bakery, leaves it outside for a moment, and when he comes back, the thief has dumped the money on the ground and stolen the wheelbarrow. That wasn't a joke, it was a rational economic decision. The wheelbarrow had utility, the paper was a liability. In Hungary in 1946, the situation was even more extreme. They printed a note worth 100 quintillion pengo. The government eventually gave up on wallets and started issuing tax pengo notes that were indexed to inflation. But even those failed. Street cleaners in Budapest were photographed sweeping massive piles of banknotes into the sewers because the sanitation department couldn't keep up with the litter. It literally became cheaper to burn bundles of cash in your furnace than to buy firewood. The thermal value of the paper exceeded its exchange value. When you are burning the currency to stay warm, you know the trade is almost over. The fallout and the future. But every get-rich-quick scheme has a victim. Pointer number 7 is the middle-class wipeout. While the speculators, the farmers, and the Hugo Stinnes types are popping champagne, someone has to lose. The losers are the responsible people, the savers, the pensioners, the people who did everything right according to the old rules. They put their money in savings accounts and bought government bonds, believing they were the safest investments in the world. In a hyperinflation event, a lifetime of savings turns into confetti overnight. A pension that was supposed to support a comfortable retirement for 20 years suddenly isn't enough to buy a tram ticket. This is the true cost of the print button. It is a ruthless transfer of wealth from the prudent middle class to the reckless speculator and the government. The government wipes out its war debt, the speculator wipes out his mortgage, and the middle class gets wiped out of existence. It destroys the moral fabric of society because it teaches people that saving is stupid and gambling is smart. Eventually, the party has to end. Pointer number 8 is the reset. This is the moment the government finally admits the game is up. They can't print anymore because the paper costs more than the face value of the note. In Germany, this happened in November 1923 with the introduction of the Rentenmark. The government slashed 12 zeros off the currency. 1 trillion old marks became one new Rentenmark. But here is the trick. The new money wasn't backed by gold because they didn't have any. It was backed by a mortgage on all the agricultural and industrial land in Germany. They basically said, trust us, this money represents the soil of the nation. And it worked. The miracle of the Rentenmark stopped the inflation instantly, mostly because people were exhausted and just wanted a currency that worked. In Zimbabwe, they took a different route. They just gave up and started using the US dollar. But the lesson is the same. The old currency goes to zero, and if you are holding it when the music stops, you lose everything. So what is the modern takeaway for our wealth masterclass? You might look at the Weimar Republic and think, that's ancient history. But the mechanics of the print button haven't changed. We see the warning signs in modern quantitative easing and massive deficit spending. The difference today is where the inflation shows up first. In 1923, it showed up in bread prices immediately. Today, because of how our financial system is wired, the new money often flows into assets first. We see stock markets at all-time highs and housing prices skyrocketing while the economy stagnates. This is asset inflation, but it comes from the same source. An expansion of the money supply that outpaces production. The final lesson is that true wealth is not currency units. Currency is just a claim check. True wealth is production, assets, and resources. If you focus on accumulating the claim checks while the central bank is diluting them, you are the patsy at the poker table. The final verdict. The verdict is simple. Paper money is a hallucination we all share. But when the government abuses the printer, we all wake up. The only safety is in owning things that cannot be printed. So keep a sack of potatoes in the basement, just in case the central bank gets creative. Subscribe to History's Wallet for more financial history secrets that aren't in the textbooks.